morning, everybody, and welcome to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works. We're in a kind of an interesting situation this week. I think with everything that's going on in the world, our conversation is one that's so important to be had. And I also think that at this point in time, it's time to restate what we're actually up to here. What we're doing is we're creating a dialogue between people, different groups of people, and giving our culture an opportunity to hear other things than what seems to be in the media and social media every day. With that in mind, today is going to be a unique experience. We've had a few different kinds of podcasts over the last year, and every one of them is designed to bring empowerment to you, the listener, and also for us to get empowered ourselves while we're in this conversation. So with that said, an interesting aspect of what we've done to date over the last year in some 65 episodes is to have a conversation and a dialogue among different people. Well, now today, I thought I might do something just a little bit different and have a conversation or a dialogue with you, our listener. And there's going to be a pause here and there as I ask a question, because I'm going to have this conversation by myself with you, our participating and supporting podcast listeners. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So I'm going to pose a question. And the question goes like this. Today, we're actually June 24th, 2021. It's been a very interesting and long year and a half since we've gone out and really spent a lot of time meeting with other people in person. All of that said, the interesting part for me is I have family here, grandchildren from Colorado, and my son and daughter, my son-in-law and daughter-in-law are here with my grandchildren. And we've done a lot of going out to dinner, to different places, and we've seen a lot of people. What I'm very interested in reporting is that everyone that we've come in contact with has had an extraordinary response to being out in public with each other. Now, the folks that work in the restaurant business, they are all wearing masks and they're observing social distancing protocols and that sort of thing. However, we walk by tables with patrons who are just happy to be out having a good meal. And again, exercising their rights as citizens to be where they can actually see other people's faces. So today, the conversation that I'd like to have is one that is based around what people seem to think and what people are saying, and the notion of critical thinking. And how that goes is, what does critical thinking mean to you? Are you aware of it? Do you understand how it would be practiced? What sorts of conversations or questions would come up as a result of using critical thinking practices? So with that said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Bill Correll. I started a computer company back in 1990 after working in a variety of different manufacturing positions, including materials management. And, that included things like production, inventory control, purchasing, traffic, the stock room, anything having to do with getting product in from vendors, maintaining the integrity of the on-hand balances, and making stuff available for the assembly process and manufacturing as they needed it, and getting it out the door at the other end by shipping it to the end user. Now, all of that said, this is not a possible task for me to do on my own. I've had as many as 250, 300 people in a half a dozen to 8 different locations that were reporting to me in a laser manufacturer that I used to work for. So we spent an awful lot of time during that period of time, and that was in the 1980s. And people during that period of time were experiencing, I think, a little bit of what I like to call a reactionary uh, experience when we seem to have enough gas for our cars. We seem to have enough money. We seem to have a very interesting and extraordinary ability to make some serious money compared to what we did 2 or 3 years earlier. Almost all positions that I was aware of were not being paid increases of 3 or 4% a year. Many were receiving 15 and 18 and 20% based on a combination of merit and how difficult it was to find other people to take the jobs. So our focus during that period of time had a lot to do with asking important questions about how do we motivate people in the workplace? How do we get folks, to be as excited about coming to work in the morning as they definitely were in those situations where they were punching out and getting ready to go home? We did notice that there was a distinct disparity in some situations, and so got real interested in how is it that people can be, kind of like walking around, during the course of the day and not having, no evidence that they're having any fun whatsoever. And then when it comes time to go home, they're practically running to get to their cars and to go to what's next. It was an interesting conversation. So if we were just to look at it as a casual observer, and quite frankly, when I got hired in at one position, they were telling me that they had a morale problem, that there was something that was kind of unique about their employees. And what was unique was they just never seemed to get it, what management was doing for them and how extraordinary their opportunity was to belong to some of these burgeoning industry and leading manufacturers of certain types of technical products. They were all engineered type things. Well, the fun part of it was, this is where the critical thinking came in. And when I got interviewed for one of my jobs, because I had maybe 3 or 4 in a 7-year period, moving from one manufacturing position to another, in order to get more experience, and I worked myself out of a job in several instances. But the question that would continuously come up is, what's wrong with our employees? We need you to get a handle on that so that we can stop the bleeding. So I was kind of a young guy. I didn't know a whole heck of a lot, but I had come from working with tools. I had come from always being kind of interested in what's next for me in terms of the next opportunity to grow. And when we would get into the conversation about what's wrong with the employees, what I would do is I would go out and interview the employees. And I would, anybody that worked for me, people that worked in other departments. And what I found is not all employees were responding exactly the same way. That was interesting to me. What I found was one of the managers who was in charge of all of the technicians, what they called final assembly and test. These were the folks that wanted, to make sure that working final product that was going to be shipped out for the installers to put in place. And in these cases, we're talking about PBX telephone equipment. That's a fancy word for saying these ones had music on hold. You could forward calls. You could have multiple outbound calls. Really, really fancy stuff for the 1980s, right? So in those instances, I went and kind of, just casually walking through, I'd pick up one of the parts that they were working on testing at the bench, and I'd say, "What do you like about working here?" And the first couple of times I asked people that question, it was like, wow, where's that coming from? And I said, look, I'm a new guy. I don't know anything. And I'm just really kind of interested. It seems to me, I walk by here and you're listening to the music on the radio and you're doing this thing and And, I did a little bit of looking into it. You have a zero rejection rate. There's nothing that comes back after you've tested and blessed it as having passed final inspection and test. And I'd like to know what's up with that. How does that work for you? And one person said to me, look, I used to have a job. I don't have a job anymore. I got a career now. And I said, really? What's that like? Can you tell me a little bit more about that? And I was kind of amazed. I said, when you had a job, what was that like? And who did you work for? The answer that came back was, I actually worked here. And the person that I worked for was, it's not here anymore. So I can tell you some things without fear of repercussions. And oh, by the way, this is just my opinion. I mean, I don't know what other people think about it, but during that period of time, I never knew what he expected from me. I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, almost every single day, as I was getting myself set up, because this is a complex job, I have to get the equipment set up in order to run tests on this, be able to look at an oscilloscope and be able to replicate an output on the O-scope. And I would get the bench all set up to do a particular kind of a sub-assembly board. And then all of a sudden, the supervisor would come through and say, well, stop doing what you're doing. I need you to do 5 of these. And then later on, I'd be, having spent another 45 minutes to an hour getting things switched over so that I could do that. I would hear around the corner somebody saying, look, we're waiting for what Joe is working on this morning in order for us to continue putting these final assemblies together and to make sure that we have no bad capacitors. And this is highly technical, I know, but the main thing here was they were counting on getting the things that Joe had set up in the morning for the afternoon. And now there were 4 people standing there with nothing to do. And they thought it was Joe's fault. So this is Joe telling me this, in a story. And I said, well, then what happened? He says, well, we got this guy who came in and he decided that instead of telling us what our jobs were, one at a time individually, he got us all together, for about a 5-minute period at the beginning of the shift. After we got in, everybody was ready to go, bench tops all clear. And he'd come around and he would say, all right, I want you to go over to the board and I want you to find the next job that needs to be worked on. And each person in there, he would say, anybody having any problems this morning that I should know about? Are there any things that that we need to take care of right off the bat, to get this out of the way for you? And Joe said, I like that. He wasn't barking orders at us. He didn't come in, saying, now stop doing this and start doing that. And what he would do is he'd say, look, we're going to have interruptions today, right? And people would say, they'd nod. Yeah, that's kind of what this is. If there's an emergency that comes in from one of our guys that's out in the field, we may have to do something, to satisfy that need for today. He said, I need 2 volunteers that will be willing to man two setups. We're going to have your regular workstation, and then we're going to have an empty workstation that you can set up very quickly in order to handle any of these emergencies that come up. Does that make sense to you guys? And they would all nod their head. And he said, look, I'm not going to watch how much you produce every single day. You guys are good at this. You probably have forgotten more than I'm going to ever know. But what I want you to know is that what you're doing is important. There are people out in the field that are doing installations, and our company looks really good based on how good we make them look. And then he looked around, and then all of a sudden, all the heads are nodding up and down. Joe told me. And with that in mind, he said, you do know that these skills that you are building here on a daily basis, no, not just the electronic stuff, not just the testing, but your ability to be flexible and to make things happen and to find a way like nothing's impossible, that's worth money out there wherever you go. you will set yourself apart from any other people that are looking for the same job that you are. It's called a can-do spirit. And essentially what that means is when you do more than is being asked for on a daily basis, and there's nobody keeping track of it, who knows? And Joe said, I can't believe he asked us that question. But he did. And so one of us put our hand in the air and said sheepishly, me, I'm going to know. And then he nodded his head very quickly. And he asked this question. He said, who knows you better than you do? Who knows whether you're doing your best or you're not? What other person could possibly give you any information that you don't already know everything about that subject? So at this point, they knew Joe's telling me, we knew we were dealing with somebody pretty interesting and pretty extraordinary, not the regular breed of cat that we've seen, come through here. And so it kept going. We did all that. We got ourselves set up. We started to set record for productivity. We started having this friendly competition between each other on two things. It never was how many could we do in a shift. Nobody cared about that. What we were really interested in was how many days could we go without anything the whole department did being rejected, by final inspection, or being rejected at the point of installation and having these emergencies. So the first thing we watched was how many days in a row did we go without having anything kicked back to us. And each time we had one emergency that had come through the final assembly and test department, that reset the clock to 0. Then we started putting that up on the wall. And this got to be kind of an interesting game for all of us to play together, where we had some community pride, and this is something we were producing together. Nobody wanted to be that guy or gal, because we had both men and women working in the department. And then the interesting thing that happened after that is that, well, we were conditioned that if there was a problem, what do? You go tell the supervisor about it, and you let them deal with it, and they figure out what the answers are, and then they tell you, and then you go back and you do it. This guy was different. He said, handle it. You know what to do. Let me say that again. He didn't have 20 questions to find out what all the facts were. He didn't say, what have you tried that hasn't worked so far? One after another, they would come to him because they'd been trained to bring their problems to the supervisor. And the answer from the supervisor at this point was, I think you have everything you need in order to be able to resolve this. If something breaks or there's nothing else that you can do, is there anyone else in the department you can turn to and get their smarts? And Joe said to me, he said, I've worked in manufacturing for about 14 different years and had a half a dozen different people that were supervisors. They came and they went, but I never had anybody just look at me and say, you got this, handle it. And so what he was teaching us was to use our own brain and to kind of weed out what a solution would look like, and then collaborate and interact with each other and say, well, look, I haven't had this happen before. I've just gone through 5 of these capacitors that go pop, pop, pop. Anytime I put 5 volts of electricity, what do we do here? Guy said, well, let's look over here. And the next thing you know, apparently, you know what a resistor is, folks? Well, apparently there was the wrong resistor that one of them found. And when they put the correct resistor in, removed it, and then put a new one in, no more problems with the capacitor. So the interesting part of this is that was a great lesson for me to get at the ripe old age of about 26 or 27 years old, that the people who were doing the job would always know so much more than a supervisor could ever know, having not ever done the job. And the teaching at that point comes from the people and the experience that they have on a daily basis. This is totally relying upon critical thinking. Nobody's asked to memorize, what would the boss do? Nobody's asked to, chapter and verse, what does it say on page 91 of the assembly manual and the drawings and all the rest of that? They know that. And they've probably forgotten, as Joe said, more than any of us who haven't done the job will ever know. This skill of critical thinking, being able to see a situation and analyze its elements, and one by one ask a very important progressive set of questions about how is this happening? What's going on here? When does it start? Who else knows something about this that could bring some solutions together by looking at this problem along with me? Now, this is a very long-winded story, but I came away thinking to myself, critical thinking is something that's very important to so many people. It's very important to anybody who wants to get ahead. And as a matter of fact, in the working environment, I don't care what you do, if you can demonstrate the ability to think on your feet and play what I call heads up ball, you're going to get a reputation for being somebody who's a problem solver, or somebody who's cool under fire. They almost never get flustered when things don't work. All of that said, the amazing part of it is that not only are people empowered and encouraged to produce results on their own and enjoy the reward having done so, but to do it within the group of people who all are the experts at what they do every day. No longer are they standing in line at the supervisor's desk. And Joe, when he kind of wrapped everything up, he said, I told you before I used to have a job, and now I have a career. And I said, well, can you explain that to me? Joe said, about 2 weeks ago, our boss said he's moving on to another job. And not only is he moving on to another job, there are 2 people in the department that he has recommended get a 50% increase in pay without having the job title change, because he knows them well enough to know that being a supervisor or being in management isn't something that they would value. They wouldn't necessarily consider that to be a step up. But they've already shown that they can generate leadership, great thinking, problem solving, and an amazing customer service level to everyone else who is depending on this department. Joe said, I was one of those 2 people. And now I know that not only do I have to bring new hires in and show them what we do here in this company, but I also have to teach them how to think for themselves. And after that conversation, I was impressed really by a couple of different things. One is how articulate Joe was in explaining and giving me that story blow by blow. He probably, more than any of the other folks that I interviewed in the other departments, demonstrated to me the power of someone providing the support, the stability, the incentive to be willing to try, fail, learn, and then get the lesson from it. In that particular instance, that was a career-changing conversation for me. I don't write a lot of things down, and I at that point in my life, I went back and I wrote down what I thought were the important elements of what Joe had told me in his story. And I hope I've done it justice. If Joe ever hears this, and with all of these things in mind, from then on, I started thinking about myself in a different fashion. I never saw myself as a manager, scheduler, coach, all of the things, the person who corrects bad behavior and gets people to do things that they don't want to do. The traditional supervisor model that probably came out of 40 or 50 years of manufacturing. We were in the middle of a revolution at that point where we decided we can either try to manage many, many details. And as the business grows and we go from 2, 3, 5, 30, 40, 300 employees, it's an undoable task. Why not train people to figure things out and be willing to take a chance and do things on their own that sooner or later, it all translates into a great end result. And oh, by the way, I told you what the first thing was, that Joe and the department conspired to keep track of how many days they went without having something returned for a failure in the field, or being sent back from the final inspection as a fully functioning assembly. and they ended up going something like 96 days before they had even a single failure in terms of something coming back. And when it did come back, they were able to pinpoint that not only was there a problem with a particular a particular component that they were using, but it was bad throughout an entire lot. And they went and called back anything that was in finished goods and replaced all of those individual components before there were any other failures in the field. So that's number one. How many days in a row can we keep track that we as a team of a dozen people don't get anything back? The other thing, how many days, and they came up with this game themselves, how many days in a row can we have every single person in the department be here and be part of the team? Mind you, nobody in management gave them this game. They said, we're a team. This works best if we're all here at the same time every single day. And if we all learn when somebody solves a problem or somebody breaks through on a different way of doing something. And the very interesting part of it was they had no lost time accidents. And I want you to know that prior to this time, according to Joe, and I went back and did some research, it was quite usual for 2 or 3 people a week to call out. Different people. And they used to call them mental health days. I don't know if that rings a bell with any of you that are listening right now. But they went an entire 90-day quarter, then they went another 90-day quarter, and then they went another 90-day quarter, and they finally had somebody who was not able to come in one shift, and that person had had an accident at home and was not able to report. So now, if there's a moral to this story, I'm going to paraphrase and maybe just focus on what Joe said was the important thing. I used to have a job, and now I have a career. The career is teaching other people to think for themselves and for them to do things that would be amazing to me if they were waiting for me to give them answers. The idea of having something greater than a job to show up for every single day, that anything is possible, given a set of circumstances and given a team to work with, people that are counting on every single day, all hands on deck. Let's be ready for any emergencies that come in. We'll take turns handling that emergency. And the really neat part of it was there was a sign that they put up on the wall, and their boss came in one morning and he comes into my office, and he says, "You got to see this, Bill." We walked back out there into the final assembly and test area, and on the wall it says, "Handle it, handle it!" Exclamation point. They put up a handmade sign. And I looked at him and I said, "Larry, you know what? Your job here is done." He said, "Yeah, it feels pretty good." So that's kind of what I have for right now. I wanted to do two things here. One is I'm experimenting with just telling a few stories to illustrate a point. And the point is that what's possible when people are empowered to think for themselves and grow, and how they relate to where they go every day, not as a job, but as a career, and to pose a question. What if we were able to do this with our children when they're in school? What if we were able to do this with our children at home? What if we were able to do this with anyone that we come into contact with, and to give them a different perspective on how the world works? Again, if you remember, our podcast is called Lighting a Candle, a World That Works. When you grant somebody the recognition and the understanding that you know they possess anything and everything that they need in order to do the next thing and learn from it. Well, I don't know. What do you think? Again, I'm Bill Correll, and you are empowered to go to my Facebook page and leave me some comments, or you can go to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works Facebook page, and make some comments there. We really want to hear from you. And if there's something else that you'd like to hear talked about, or if you'd like to be a guest on a future podcast, by all means, let us know that too. In the meantime, signing off for today, have yourself an amazing day, and handle it, handle it. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.